Okay, everybody look in the Art Scroll Chumashim, verse 53, Parsha Miketz. It's page 230, if you have yours there. It's verse 53, chapter 41 in the book of Genesis, for everyone following in English. Okay, and here we go. It says, the 7 years of abundance that came to pass in the land of Egypt ended. So again, in the story, Yosef foretold through the dreams of power that there will be 7 years of tremendous abundance. There will be the richest country, and they'll prosper, and everything will be amazing for them. And then 7 years of famine would follow, and now come the 7 years of famine. And the verse continues. I'm reading in English for the sake of getting to it quickly. And the 7 years of famine began approaching just as Joseph had said. There was famine in all the lands, but in the land of Egypt there was bread. Okay? Why? Because Joseph came up with a plan, which is why Pharaoh chose him to be the leader, to help save Egypt when the time of famine came. And there are a lot of lessons to learn from that whole story about how we should treat success when we're blessed with it, because there could be times that are going to come that are not. We won't be so successful, and tremendous lessons to learn there. Everyone should look at it and do their own thinking of how they could be responsible with their financial success when they have it. And if they don't have it, Bezrat Hashem, may God bless us all, me included, that we should all have some financial success, because why not? This is verse 55 now we're going to look at. It says like this. When all the land of Egypt hungered, the people cried out to Pharaoh for bread. So Pharaoh said to all of Egypt, go to Joseph. Whatever he tells you to do, you should do. Egypt definitely took heed to what Joseph said and prepared for this famine. That means that they all stored bread and food for when there would be no food. The problem is this. Right after it says that for all of Egypt there was food, it now says that Egypt came crying to Pharaoh that they have no food, and he said to go to Yosef and do whatever he tells you. Where did their food go? So Rashi helps us understand what the Torah didn't write. And here's another very good point to understand, that the Torah doesn't write every single word and every single thing that it wants us to know, like a novel that's 1,000 pages, but it tells us what we need to know, and there's more information there. Obviously, in the oral Torah, it was spread without being written in the actual 5 books of Moshe that are part of the story. And so Rashi comes and tells us like this. People stored privately for the years to come that were going to be famine. Everybody prepared for the same famine, but certain people's produce that they stored rotted, and they lost all that. All that effort was in yet nothing, because it all rotted, and they had no food right now, and there was no way to produce food right now because these were years of famine. Why were they so upset? Why did they run to Pharaoh instead of dealing with Yosef to begin with? They went to Yosef to begin with. And what happened? They didn't like what Yosef told them. Why didn't they like what Yosef told them? Because he told them to do something very radical and not accepted in the time of the story. He told them to do Brit Milah. He told them to circumcise themselves. Okay? That's what he told them. And this is a very bizarre part of our story. Why is Yosef, a Jew who was circumcised, telling Egyptians that came to him for food because they're starving to do circumcision, and then he could give them food? Why? Makes no sense, so to speak. Then they go to Pharaoh and say, Pharaoh, you took this Hebrew to rule over us. Now he's telling us to do circumcision, otherwise he's not going to give us food. And what's Pharaoh's answer? His answer is, if you're stuck and he's the one with all the food and he's in charge, you have to listen to him. Even though, I'm Pharaoh, you have to listen to him. Again, because they stored it and it was ruined. So we're stuck with the question, though. We understand now what they had to do. They had to do Brit Milah, and they could get food. And they did do it, and they got food. But why? Why did Yosef care that they were circumcised or not? It doesn't seem to make any sense as far as we know. Since when is there a requirement for non-Jews to do circumcision? There isn't. Even till today, there isn't. Certainly back then, there wasn't. So what is motivating Yosef for such a really difficult request, which they had every right to reject? So let's now take a deeper look at what's going on over here through the lens of Kabbalah. certainly and specifically the foremost Kabbalist that has come to the world about 500 years ago, roughly, the Rav Yitzchak Luria, the Arizal he's called. This is what his student, his main student, Rav Chaim Vital, who had the potential to be the Mashiach in his days, writes about this. So essentially, in order to understand this, we have to go back really a few generations, really to the beginning of creation. We have to understand what's going on really from a soul perspective. I mean, the story that we talk about and learn about on this physical plane of reality is only the end result of many worlds that exist above us, culminating in this idea of where souls really come from. So when we look at the story of souls, we will understand and appreciate better what's going on over here, and it's this. Really, God created, from the beginning of creation, souls with a holy potential. Souls that had a potential to be holy and connect with Torah and mitzvahs. And unfortunately, after the first sin of Adam and Eve, those souls fell and became mixed, literally mixed in a realm of evil and good, a mixture of good and evil. And those souls were affected by it. And there became a mixture of good and evil within all the souls. Some of them became so trapped in the realms of evil, on the lowest levels of evil, that it was impossible for them to escape out of that level. Other souls were less trapped. But the common denominator with all of these potential souls is they all now became tarnished and blemished with this mixture of good and evil on whatever level of mixture they experienced. These souls eventually were born to the 12 tribes in Egypt. That's where they were born, the main souls. These souls that were, so to speak, reincarnated several times and ultimately became the children of the Shvatim, of the tribes. These were the souls that were fixed and were born through the channels of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and then the 12 tribes. There were other souls that I mentioned that were less fixed or more damaged, much lower level. Those souls were not born to the tribes, but rather they were born as Egyptians in Egypt. And Yosef was able to perceive through divine communication, divine understanding, that the souls that came to him and asked for food because their produce rotted, those were specifically souls that were part of, in some way, some little bit of a unclear way, they were part of the Jewish people on a soul level, but they didn't merit to be born through the tribes later. They were born premature before the tribes gave birth to children in Egypt and developed the idea of the Bnei Israel in Egypt. They were called Egyptians here, and they were ultimately this mixed multitude of Jews that clung to the Jewish people later. What it means is this: their souls had some type of connection with Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and the souls of Israel and the people of Israel. And Yosef saw that right now in this time and place and told them to do circumcision. Only them, not all of Egypt. Now, what that did was, that did give them a now more stronger connection to the Jewish people. But in this case now, Yosef is telling them to do it not only just because I want you Egyptians to be circumcised in order for me to give you food, but be part of the idea of the circumcision that connects with the children of Israel. So now it becomes some type of connection, real connection, and connects them more to the Jewish people. That's the Kabbalistic answer as to why he told only them to circumcise themselves. And we see how the story develops later when the Jews are finally redeemed from Egypt 210 years later. So what we see is a mixed multitude of people that we don't know who they are. The Torah doesn't explicitly say who they are, that say that they want to leave with the Jews. So who do you think this mixed multitude of people were? So these people were in fact those very same people that Yosef told to circumcise themselves, because they had children who had children and who had children. And all those people that started with this one group became their own little mini nation within Egypt that they were different from Egypt because they were circumcised, and they continued, it seems like from this they continued the tradition. And so they wanted to leave with the Jews. And so they were what we call quasi-Jews. And Kabbalah, the Zohar, the Or Chaim HaKadosh points this out when it says Am B'nai Yisrael, the people of Israel, it meant them. But when they said, or just the nation that came out with them, that was they usually become Erev Rav, the mixed multitude. But their whole idea that they were there in the first place was because they had a spiritual connection specifically to the Jewish people. And that's the real answer as to why Yosef tells them to be circumcised over here.